Hello, and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Excited about today because we've got two of our favorite apologists from right here in our apostolate, Catholic Answers. Second hour, Karlo Broussard will be here, and we're going to try to overcome obstacles to faith in Jesus. If you feel that you have an obstacle to committing yourself to Jesus, to coming fully home to Jesus, then the second hour is perfect for you. Maybe you've got someone that you want to help to overcome that obstacle. We welcome you, second hour. First hour, we're going to do tips for defending the faith. If you'd like some tips for defending the faith, whether to an atheist, agnostic, whether to maybe a person who's of a non-Christian religion, maybe a fellow Christian, you want to defend the Catholic faith to them. Any tips for defending the faith? Any questions about tips for defending the faith are welcome. 888-318-7884. 888-318-7884. And we've got just one of the best in the world to help you out this hour. It's Trent Horn, the author of Answering Atheism, Persuasive Pro-Life, Why We're Catholic, and a whole bunch of other books. Trent Horn, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Cy. Next hour, when you're with Karlo, can you ask him if he has any recommendations for how I can give not just my whole life over to Jesus, but even like when I drive, like when I'm in my car, like I'm looking for like a prayer or maybe a song, like to really encourage me to like, even like when I'm in my car, I want to give that over to Jesus.
Do you know how life is like a process of ongoing conversion? And then there's new places in your life where the gospel light needs to shine all the time. I actually had a moment in my car one time where I realized, the gospel, it just came to me. Like the gospel is true when I'm in my car, just like it's true when I'm not in my car. I have to stop driving like this. Are you still?
No, and the idea here is no matter where you're at, you want Jesus to take the wheel.
Oh, I see.
That's what I'm.
Yeah, so I gotcha.
There you go. Also, for all our viewers on YouTube and Facebook Live, I would like your comments if you are as horrified as I am by the cat picture next to Cy Kellett.
I don't know what you're talking about. 888-318-7884. Trent is also the proprietor of the Council of Trent, a very popular podcast defending, well, all the things you'd like defending Jesus and his church and defending life and engaging in wonderful conversations with people who might agree with Trent and might not agree with Trent. You can find that at TrentHornPodcast.com. That's where you can go. And Trent announced yesterday that he's going to be doing the podcast on YouTube and including PowerPoint videos. And that is when I announced that we are going to include cats in our videos from now on. 888-318-7884, the number, if you have a question about how to defend the faith, some aspect of the faith. There's something about the faith that you would like help defending, maybe to a friend, maybe to a colleague, maybe to a loved one. Maybe to someone who believes, maybe to someone who doesn't believe. Trent Horn is the guy to call. 888-318-7884. It does seem to me tips for defending the faith sometimes has morphed now into we just need to defend basic reality. And I'm going to tell you why. This is a rumor I heard today. I heard that this is in the news, but I don't know that there's a proposal for legislation here in California. You know the beloved state of California.
My ex. Don't get me started on my ex.
California is your ex. Where stores will be fined for having sections of the store labeled boys or girls.
Well, I'm just glad they didn't tell the stores that they have to have 52 different sections to correspond with the 52 genders that exist.
But don't you get the feeling like we just have to defend reality sometimes? Like it's not all high apologetics. Sometimes you just got to go, nah, it's okay to have a boys section and a girls section.
Right, but there is, and this is something I briefly mentioned yesterday, Cy, when I said that Ryan Anderson's excellent book, When Harry Became Sally. It's a cheeky title, but I think it's an appropriate one. And it's a very well-researched and compassionate book addressing transgender ideology. And Amazon pulled it. It's as far as I know, it is still not available on Amazon anymore. It might be at Barnes & Noble. I don't know. But it's just about crushing opposition when you put forward such a distorted view of reality. And also, it's internally contradictory, Cy, because on the one hand, people will say, oh, well, gender it's just a social construct, whatever. Right. They'll say that, but then when I want to ask them, okay, but transgender seems to be a very real thing that people hold on to, that that men and women, they'll say you could be a man or you can be a woman. It's based on what you experience. Okay, but it seems like you see there's a difference between being a man and a woman beyond our experiences. Because if I were to say a transgender man was actually a biological woman who is claiming to be a man, that would be considered hateful. So clearly, people distinguish man and woman are different. They are not the same. Even transgender advocates agree men and women are not the same. So my question for them, and it's the question no advocate has ever or will ever be able to answer, is what is the difference between men and women?
Right.
What is it that makes men men and women women? Beyond, and the only definition they can give is, well, a man is someone who says they're a man and a woman is someone who says they're a woman, which evacuates the terms of any meaning whatsoever. So, it's difficult to see that, but we have to be able to put forward in charity. We have to be able to respond to these claims.
888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. I'm going to go to calls right now, Trent. A bunch of folks on the line. It's Tips for Defending the Faith this hour with Trent Horn. If you'd like tips on defending some aspect of the faith, you are welcome to call. I think there's 2 lines open now, 888-318-7884. But I have to tell you, I don't usually read you comments from Facebook, Trent. But Patrick, our good friend Patrick in New York, says that somebody did a great job on the lighting for Trent's studio, that the lighting has improved in Trent's studio. I just thought I'd say that.
What? Well, that's good to hear. Honestly, it's not the lighting. It's a camera. I bought a brand new camera, and slowly but surely I'm trying to get my studio up and rolling here. I had it's funny. So I had an old Logitech webcam, and then I bought a new one. And you always think the new one will look a lot different and sleeker than the old one, but it almost looked the same. And I'm like, I got gypped. It looks the same. Then I plugged it in. I'm like, oh, it's actually very different. So,
well, I thought you would like that because you were just asking us just before we went on the air, does this look better? And then right out of the box,
somebody noticed.
Patrick in New York said it looks better. So, all right, off to the phones we go. Oh, we're starting in Germany. We are starting in Germany with Jason.
In Deutschland.
Watching it on YouTube. I'm glad they have YouTube. I'm not sure they still have it in Australia. Australia's been having trouble. But Jason in Germany, you there with us?
I'm here.
Hi, Jason. Go ahead with your question for Trent.
Hello, Trent. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Thanks for taking my question.
Thank you.
I've heard it said, usually from Orthodox, that because Peter also ordained bishops in Antioch and I believe Alexandria, that therefore this unique office of the papacy it's multiple. So how do we defend the claim that it's only the final resting place of Peter in Rome where this unique role comes from?
Right. And so what I would say is that how we engage those who say that, well, all of the bishops. Now, what's interesting here is I think the Orthodox would hold that it's not just in Antioch or other places where Peter was. They would say that all of the bishops are equal, but that it's interesting, though, the Orthodox say that the Bishop of Rome has a primacy of honor, but not a primacy of authority. They will say the Bishop of Rome is the first among equals. So it's interesting, Jason, this argument that you have heard that, well, Peter ordained bishops. He probably ordained bishops at Antioch. He was the bishop of Antioch before he was in Rome. So therefore, all of the successors of these other sees where Peter would have equal authority with each other. But even the Orthodox don't believe this because they say that Rome is first among equals, or it has a primacy of honor. But they're not willing to grant that as a kind of primacy of authority. So even they admit, compared to the other sees, Rome, there's something special about the Bishop of Rome, but it's only a primacy of honor, not one of authority. So I think there are 2 ways we should go about, I think, when Catholics and Orthodox dialogue about this issue. One, I do believe that Catholics should ask Eastern Orthodox to bear a burden of proof in this regard and put forward evidence saying, okay, well, you're claiming all the bishops have equal authority. There is no bishop that has authority over other bishops or serves to settle disputes between them. Where does the Bible or church history affirm this kind of leadership? So I would ask them to prove that instead of just starting it as an assumption that the Catholic has to disprove. I'd ask them to prove it. And then number two, I would go to both the New Testament to talk about Peter's unique role. But you might say, yeah, but what about Rome? What about, Peter's unique, but how does this factor into Rome? I would just say, how is the Bishop of Rome viewed in the early church? And it's very clear that the Bishop of Rome is necessary to ratify ecumenical councils. In the 2nd century, Pope Victor I excommunicated an entire group of churches for not celebrating Easter on the wrong date. St. Irenaeus said it wasn't a great idea to do that, but never said he didn't have the authority to do that. So it seems clear in the early church that there is an appellative function to the Bishop of Rome. You appeal to him. And so I know some Orthodox apologists who say, yeah, he has universal appellate duties, like you can appeal to Rome, but that doesn't mean he has universal jurisdiction. And I said, well, that's kind of a difference without a distinction. So those are the two tacks that I would take. And as a resource, Jason, I would recommend there's a great debate that was just hosted on Matt Fradd's Pints with Aquinas YouTube page between Eric Ibarra and an apologist for Eastern Orthodoxy. I would highly recommend that you go and watch that if you haven't already. Eric is one of the best guys out there on engaging our Eastern Orthodox brothers and sisters. So is that a helpful reply?
Yes, it is. I watched that debate, and Ibarra and I were friends on Facebook, so I'll bring it to him as well. I'm just trying to get some more clarification on this.
Sure, absolutely. And tell Eric I said hi.
I will. Thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you, Jason.
Perfect.
Trent Horn's our guest this hour, and you can ask anything about if you need a tip for defending the Catholic faith. If there's some aspect of the faith that you would like help defending, Trent is here to help you, 888-318-7884. I'm just going to read it the way Carrie wrote it. We got this ad. You tell me if this makes sense, all right? Apologist Alley Wednesday. Have you visited Apologist Alley? Apologist Alley can be found at shop.catholic.com and has all the resources by your favorite apologists separated by apologists. Want to load up on Trent Horn resources? Visit the Trent Horn section. Love Karlo Broussard? Check out the Karlo Broussard corner of Apologist Alley. And today until midnight, you'll find all of Trent and Karlo's books, CDs, and DVDs on sale at a very special price. That's Apologist Alley at shop.catholic.com.
Call us now with your question. Hello? On Catholic Answers Live.
Hi, this is Cy Kellett. Catholic Answers Focus is the podcast for living, understanding, and defending your Catholic faith, and you're not going to want to miss it this week. We've got our friend Monica Dumit from Australia to talk about what's happening with confession and how governments are infringing on the right to confession around the world. And we've also got Chris Check, the first part of a 3-part series on the Inquisition. CatholicAnswersFocus.com is where you can find us, or find us wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or just watch us on YouTube, CatholicAnswersFocus.com.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Celebrate the beauty and sanctity of humanity with the Gift of Life Novena Bracelet. Designed exclusively for EWTN, it features 9 prayer beads, a St. Benedict crucifix, a miraculous medal, and medal of St. Anne with her daughter, the Blessed Virgin Mary. Ask for the prayers of these holy saints with the Gift of Life Novena Bracelet, now available for just $39.95. To order, go to EWTNRC.com and search for item number 739.
I guess that made sense, Nick. I couldn't figure out what Apologist Alley was at first, but by the time I got to the end of the copy, I understood what it was.
I hope that, Cy, so you mentioned that I have a special section of Apologist Alley.
Yeah.
I hope that my section was where a mentor of mine was completely refuted by an anti-Catholic and completely broken, and I saw that, and I was just moved to never let that happen to anyone else again. And so I vowed to fight error. It's Batman. Come on.
Oh, come on.
Batman's origin isn't
is in an alley. I am
because
so slow today.
It was Crime Alley.
Yeah.
Bruce Wayne became Batman that moment in Crime Alley when his parents were gunned down by.
And you know
depends
what?
on who
I don't know why I'm so slow. Like you're right on the money. But I was stuck because when Nick heard it, he was like, he thought there was like an apologist somewhere named Allison that we were calling Apologist Alley. And maybe there is someone there. Hey, they're talking about me right now. If you
I might have a talk with marketing on this one side. Like, I think I prefer like Apologist Avenue.
Yeah,
because
there
like
you go.
an alley, it's like, hey, come back here. I got a tract for you behind this dumpster.
I got a great book on Jesus for you.
I like open up a trench coat and they're all just there, and then someone comes by. Those are counterfeit Christ books that he's selling.
That was see now Trent just went meta on us. He just went so meta. Let's go to Newberg, Oregon, before we get ourselves in trouble. You know what? Kerry writes really good copy, and we shouldn't be making fun of him here on the air because he writes really good copy. Ryan,
but now people know. Go check out Apologist Alley.
Yep, go check out Apologist Alley, where we got a lot of cool stuff. Ryan in Newberg, Oregon, who's listening on the Catholic Answers Live app. You are next, Ryan. Go ahead with your question for Trent Horn.
Hello. Can you guys hear me?
We can, yes.
Yeah, we do.
Alrighty. My question, Trent, is what tips do you have for dialoguing with someone who self-describes himself as an agnostic materialist?
That's an interesting combination of words, Ryan, because a materialist is someone who believes the only things that exist are those things that are composed of matter. And an agnostic would be someone who is, when it comes to the question, does God exist? Their answer is maybe or I don't know. But if you believe the only things that exist are composed of matter, then you would necessarily be an atheist because God, by definition, is an immaterial being. So I mean, I hope this person just might be mistaken with their own terms, but it would be the way you would engage them, I guess, would depend on how much of a materialist they are and how much of an agnostic they are. I mean, you can provide arguments to the existence of God, but if they think the only things that exist are things made of matter, then we've got problems. So I think you have to disabuse them of this claim of materialism, the idea that the only things that exist are those things that are made of matter. So there's a variety of ways you could do that. You could ask them, well, what about things that appear to exist and are real, but are not made of matter? So you could say, look, if something's made of matter, it seems like I've got my phone here, okay? And it's made of matter, so that means that we could locate this phone in the universe based on its spatial location. So I can describe this phone through a physical description. I can make a physical material description. If I knew the location of every atom, I could perfectly communicate this phone to you, where it is if it's material, okay? But there's other things that are out there like minds. Like you're looking at the Catholic Answers Live app. There are people who are looking at their radios. They're having images of looking at material things. You know, we have images in our mind of things. We're all thinking about different things. But our mental states seem very real. Like, I really am having a mental state. It's not an illusion. I think, therefore I am. But the materialist may say, well, your mental state is just this electrical thing in your brain. No, that can't be the same thing, because if you know every single thing about this electrical state in my brain, you still won't know the mental state I'm having. You won't know what I'm thinking about in my mind. Like, what I'm thinking about, you can't find it with spatial coordinates. So that's one thing I would do to make a challenge to materialism. I would say that if you're a materialist, you can't believe people have moral responsibility, that we can hold people morally accountable because they're just matter in motion. You can no more, if materialism is true and we're just matter in motion, then you can't hold a serial killer morally responsible for killing people any more than you could hold an avalanche responsible for killing people. It's just matter in motion that has bad consequences. So there's a variety of ways you might do that. I'll leave you with an argument here. Well, actually, it's a short essay by Ben Page called Arguing to Theism from Consciousness. You can get it at academia.edu. Ben Page, Arguing to Theism from Consciousness. He teaches at Oxford, and it's an interesting argument for the existence of God from the fact of consciousness and how it can't be explained as a purely material thing. So that's might be some of the routes that I would take. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it's really helpful, especially the part with minds, because this person is really into psychology.
Right, yeah. So if you're trying to figure out what it means for that we have mental states that cause things, if the mind is something real, then materialism is a very, very hard time explaining that.
Yeah. Thanks. I appreciate the call. Very busy. A lot of people want tips for defending the faith with Trent Horn today. So we'll go to Ogden, Utah, where Bryce is watching on Facebook Live. Bryce, go ahead with your question for Trent Horn.
Hey, Trent. So I need tips on defending the faith in God against atheists who dismiss cosmological arguments because they say, quote, quantum mechanics proves that uncaused causes exist. But if all quantum interactions conserve energy, how are they saying that? I just don't know what to tell them.
Right, and I think that's an important point to address. You'll hear people, say this all the time, like, "Oh, well, you've got quantum." There's two ways they go about it. They might say, "Well, you've got things that appear to not have a cause." The most famous example would be so-called virtual particles that seem to emerge from a quantum vacuum without a cause. But that phrase "without a cause" is very ambiguous. Or atomic nuclei, so the center part of atoms, when they, so the nucleus of the atom, where the protons and the neutrons are, this particle is emitted when they experience atomic decay. We're not able to predict when that happens. But the way I would argue against this is to say, look, we do see causal elements here. Whether it's and there is a dispute about whether so-called virtual particles actually exist. Like, scientists don't really agree on what these fundamental particles are. Some of them think they're not even real. They're just kind of mathematical bookkeeping devices to understand the formulas in physics. So a few ways I might go about when someone says that these quantum events show there are no causes. I would propose an alternative explanation. I would say, no, we do see a causal relationship here. The atomic nuclei causes the particle to come into existence. The quantum field causes the virtual particle to come into existence. A quantum field is not nothing. A quantum field is an extremely low-level energy state. And so it's capable of producing something. We would just say if it is uncaused, it's not that it's uncaused, it just doesn't have classical causes. So like if you play billiards, for example, and you knock billiard balls around on a table with a cue ball, like the world's best billiards players, they can get at a pool table and they know each angle they hit the cue ball when the balls go around on the pool table, it's extremely predictable. We know what is going to happen. The balls just don't arrange themselves, and it's all very predictable. It involves classical mechanics, classical physics. With quantum physics, you have causes happening, but it's more probabilistic. So we know, like, when I strike the cue ball, 100% of the time it will hit the next ball, and then it will do such and such. But when you get down to these really, really tiny particles, sometimes we have to say, well, there is a causal relationship, but it's probabilistic. 50% of the time, it will decay this way, or 50% of the time a particle will arrange this way. But it's not something from nothing. Here's a good quote from a physicist named David Albert, a well-known theoretical physicist. He says that vacuum states, no less than giraffes or refrigerators or solar systems, are particular arrangements of elementary physical stuff. The fact that particles can pop in and out of over time as those fields rearrange themselves is not a whit more mysterious than the fact that fists, like you put a fist, your hand is a fist, can pop in and out of existence over time as my fingers rearrange themselves. And none of these poppings remotely is in the neighborhood of creation from nothing. So that's what I would say is you have probabilistic causes here. And then number two, I would say that they are causal. There is a causal framework here. It's not uncaused because scientists can reproduce these causal experiments. Scientists can reproduce quantum mechanical events in laboratories. There's a famous one you can look up online called the double slit experiment. It involves events at the quantum level, but you can reproduce the quantum slit experiment. The double slit experiment. It's called the double slit experiment. Look it up online. It's a cool experiment, but scientists can reproduce it. If quantum events were uncaused, you couldn't reproduce these events with regularity in laboratories, but you can reproduce them. So there is a causal framework here, even if we don't always know what the cause and effect will be, because it's more probabilistic. So I hope that was a helpful explanation for you. I go into this in more in depth in my book, Answering Atheism, which I would commend to you and other listeners if you want to go and check that out.
Thanks, Bryce. You probably hear the music. That means we got to take a quick break, but we'll come back with more tips for defending the faith with Trent Horn, who's been doing a lot of work for us this week. It's really nice to have Trent back. 888-318-7884.
We're here for you. Call now. Catholic Answers Live.
If you spend any time on Twitter, Facebook, or mainstream media, you're probably familiar with the litany of slogans that skeptics employ to rescue you from the foolish belief that God exists. The constant onslaught seems to leave people with the idea that they have no alternative but to embrace atheism. How can a Christian respond? In One Less God Than You, John DeRosa breaks down 20 of the most common atheist challenges and shows you how to craft effective answers. Atheism is more aggressive and widespread than ever. Read One Less God Than You and prepare yourself to respond with the joyful truth that God is real. To get your copy of One Less God Than You, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
To many people, even many Christians, purgatory is a fantasy, or worse, a wicked lie invented by the church to make salvation complicated and keep people in fear. But I'm here to tell you that purgatory is fact, not fiction. The Bible supports it, Christians have historically believed in it, and it makes theological sense. In my new book, Purgatory is for Real, I provide the evidence and reasoning to help you understand this controversial doctrine and demonstrate how it's actually a joyful, hopeful reality, not something shadowy and mysterious, but a sign of God's love and mercy. To get your copy of Purgatory is for Real, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Trent Horn, our guest this hour. Next hour, it'll be Karlo Broussard. Karlo's going to be here. We're going to talk about overcoming obstacles to Jesus. If you're having trouble yourself coming to faith in Jesus, or if you know someone who is and you'd like to help them overcome the obstacles, second hour is for you. This hour, tips on any aspect of defending the faith. If you would like to defend the faith better, if you would like to know how to defend the faith against a particular attack, you are welcome to call Trent, 888-318-7884. Of course, when I say Trent, I mean Trent Horn, who's an extraordinary apologist and speaker and author and the proprietor of the Council of Trent, his podcast that you can find at trenthornpodcast.com. Let's go to Maryland now. Josh in Maryland is watching on YouTube. Josh, thanks very, very much for your call. Go ahead with your question for Trent Horn.
Hi, I have a question about some of the more Thomistic cosmological arguments. One of the premises is that we need a first cause because we can't have an infinite chain of causes. My question is, how do we defend the claim that we can't have an infinite chain of causes?
Right. So what I would say here, Josh, it's important for people to understand the causal chain we're talking about with the arguments of St. Thomas Aquinas are different than other cosmological arguments. So you have, for example, the Protestant philosopher William Lane Craig. He puts forward the Kalam cosmological argument, which says that the series of past events cannot be infinite, and so it must be finite. Thomas, however, did not believe that the universe had to be finite. He believed the universe could have still been eternal, but even in an eternal universe, you couldn't have an infinite series of causes. There still had to be an ultimate mover. So you might say, well, wait, that sounds like they're both talking about infinite paths or infinite causes. What's the difference? In the Kalam version, or the version that says the universe had a beginning, you're dealing more with a causal series like dominoes. I used to have these really cool dominoes as a kid that were on these plastic tracks. And so you could assemble the plastic tracks, and they had loops. And if anyone's listening, write in the comments on social media if you had these same dominoes as a kid. I love them. But the thing is, with a chain of dominoes, if you knock them over, if you get rid of the first domino in the series, it doesn't affect the rest of the series. You don't need the dominoes at the beginning of the series for the other ones later to fall over. And so that would be the series like all of the days in the past. The past days don't exist anymore. We don't need them to exist for the present to happen. But Thomas is talking about a different kind of causal series. It's not like a bunch of dominoes knocking each other down where you could throw away the old dominoes and it doesn't affect the others falling. It's more like a series of gears. So think of a bunch of interlocking gears that are spinning with each other. These are different. If you take away any single gear in the series, the whole series stops spinning. And so Thomas says that the first cause for Thomas is not like the first domino that knocks over all the dominoes. That's not the first cause for Thomas. For Thomas, it's more like a center rotating gear. It's like one gear in the center, and then all the other gears spin out and away from it. But that gear doesn't get spun by anything else. So that's the kind of series that he's talking about, this continual, or to use jargon alert, an essentially ordered causal series. So to show you, someone might say, well, maybe we don't need that center gear. Maybe if you had an infinite number of gears, they would keep spinning. No, that doesn't seem right. And I think the best way to show that is to just offer thought experiments for people to consider to see if their conclusion is reasonable. One that I like when it comes to showing this, there's two that I like actually to bring it down to earth. One would be a chandelier and the other would be a train. So imagine I had a chandelier hanging above me, and it's connected by a series of chains. You know, you have no single chain can hold the chandelier up on its own. It has to be connected to something. And you couldn't explain the chandelier hanging above me if it's just an infinite number of chains going up, because no chain can pull the chandelier up. You put them all together, they don't have any pulling power. They got to be connected to something that's not like them. So that would show you, just as an infinite number of chains can't hold up a chandelier without a ceiling anchor, you can't have these infinite essentially ordered causes. Another example might be a train. And once again, I'm just thinking of examples from my childhood. I love trains. When I was a kid in San Diego, I would always go to the Model Train Museum in San Diego. It's one of my favorites. Now think of a train car. Can it move on its own? No. If it's a flat grade, it's not going to move. What if you attached another car to it? Well, it's still not going to go anywhere. What if you attached another car to it? It's still not going to go anywhere. No matter how many train cars, like box cars, you attach to it, it's not moving. This would be when we're talking about Thomas's argument for motion, by the way. But if you need then, even if you have an infinite number of cars, you would still need the locomotive to pull it. You need something different than the cars themselves. So those are two examples that I might give. The train is very analogous to what Thomas argues for the argument from motion and change for the existence of God. The gear example would probably fit better in Thomas's second way. I'd recommend that. And for other resources on these arguments, Ed Fazer has a great book called 5 Proofs for the Existence of God. And he also has a good book, Aquinas, that talks about the 5 ways. And also, you can check out, we have some resources. I think Karlo's written on some of this stuff at Catholic.com. So you might benefit from that as well. Is that helpful, Josh?
Yeah. Yeah. So basically what you're saying is that we need the source of the causal power.
Right. Just because you add something, it doesn't follow that you're going to establish causal power just because you add things together. And so it's like, let's say I was trying to buy something at a store, okay, and I have Monopoly money. That's all I have is Monopoly money. And I put down $500 Monopoly bill. And the guy is like, You can't buy anything with that. It has no buying power. Okay, but what if I had an infinite number of Monopoly bills? You still can't buy anything, because even if you make an infinite number of them, that doesn't increase the zero amount of buying power each bill has. And I think it's the same for causes. If a cause does not have intrinsic causal power of its own, but gets it from something else, adding them together, even an infinite number of them, doesn't create any causal power. You need it to come from a prime mover or an uncaused cause. So I hope that's helpful to you. And thank you so much for calling in.
Thanks, Josh. We'll go now to Bryce in Bend, Oregon, watching on YouTube. Bryce, go ahead with your question for Trent Horn.
Hey, Trent. I'm a fan of the Council of Trent podcast, and I watched the episode when you were speaking from the man from Street Epistemology, and I watched a talk he did where basically he said when he wanted to talk with Christians on the street, he wouldn't go after their assertions, and he even wouldn't really go after their evidence. He would kind of try to attack the methodology that they would use to come to conclusions. And I feel like that's really helpful in religious debates to establish a methodology, because like it's almost like a person should ask when they kind of go down an investigation into religion of saying, well, what percentage chance should I believe this to be before I accept it? You know, you could think, well, 50-50 would make sense, but then you might consider Pascal's wager and say, oh, it should probably be lesser than that. And I feel like I think you've made this observation too that I found really strong when you were talking about the deuterocanonical books, where you know, if Protestants were more aware of this, they would be upset where atheists act as if, oh, I need you to completely prove to me that Christianity exists while I stay with this null hypothesis, this assumption that atheism is true. But then they'll do the similar thing where once they agree Christianity is true, they'll assume evangelical Protestantism is the truth.
Right.
And Catholicism needs to prove itself. So do you think in conversations I should bring up methodology more when I talk to people? And
oh, sorry, I thought you were done. But go ahead. You got the question, Trent.
Yes, sure. Well, Bryce, thank you for watching the podcast. And yeah, that was a good discussion I had with Anthony Magnabosco. He engages in street epistemology, which if you watch him, you'll see he's sort of an atheistic doppelganger to me. You'll notice when I engage people on the show who are not Catholic, I want to dialogue with them, I'm very Socratic. I want to find out what they believe and why they believe it. And I think it's important for any of us. In fact, this will probably be a future book project of mine. I truly believe we have to learn not just the right answers, but the right questions, the right way of sharing the answers. And we got to get people to question what they already believe before they're willing to accept what we believe. So I believe, Bryce, that you're correct. We need to look at methodology. I would just take the word methodology out, because the average listener might say, well, what do you mean methodology? What's that about? What I mean is you need to focus on asking the other person, what do you believe? And then why do you believe that? Or how do you know that it's true? I appreciate you brought up that this came up in my debate with Steve Christie on the deuterocanonical books of Scripture, that this happens. There's a double standard with Protestants on the inerrancy of Scripture. So what's interesting is Protestants, when they'll talk to an atheist will say, until you prove the Bible doesn't have any errors in it, I'm not going to believe. And a Protestant will say, well, I don't have to do that. If I know the Bible is the Word of God, even if it has tough passages, I don't have to prove every single one with a solution. There's some tough passages in the Bible. But I can know the Bible is the Word of God, even if there are these apparent difficulties. But then the Protestant will turn right around on the Catholic and say, until you can prove the deuterocanonical books are completely without error, I will not believe they are the inspired Word of God. So they'll borrow the same thing. So you're right, Bryce. It's about going after the core assumptions a person makes and getting them to defend their worldview. This is something I've been preaching, ironically enough, for a while. When we engage Protestants, we have to get them to say, look, you shouldn't start with Protestantism as a default assumption any more than an atheist should start with the non-existence of God as an assumption. You have to start and say, hey, where's your burden of proof for sola scriptura, for the New Testament canon, and go from there. But ultimately, what we have to do in our apologetic conversations is ask, what do you think? And then, why do you think that? How do you know that's true? How did you come to believe that? and get the other person to defend it. And hopefully while they're defending it, they will see, wait a minute, I might not have great reasons to believe this actually. And when that happens, they might be more open to hearing what we have to say. So is that a helpful reply? Or did we lose them?
Bryce?
Oh, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Yes. Is that helpful?
Oh,
yeah.
Yes, I was saying great response. Big fan. Thank you, Trent.
Oh, well, we
No
didn't
problem.
want to
Thanks
miss
for calling,
that.
guys.
I'm glad we didn't miss that. Thanks, Bryce. We got to take a quick break. Right back with more tips for defending the faith with Trent Horn.
Hang on. We'll be right back with more Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Do you love sharing the gospel and want to learn to be more effective? Join the St. Paul Street Evangelization online School of Evangelization. You will learn to build bridges of trust and make disciples by befriending strangers, proclaiming the gospel, inviting people to the church, and praying with others. We'll ask for a pledge of financial support, but if you are unable to give, we'll give you a membership at no cost. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
EWTN, communicating the faith.
Fallen away Catholic years and years ago, doing my own thing, and my mom and dad never gave up on me, and I know it was the Holy Rosary, and they kept after me. Philip, pray your rosary, and eventually I did. I'm a member of the Knights of the Immaculata, Maximilian Kolbe's group. I'm with the Legion of Mary, and I haven't stopped leading the rosary in nursing homes, thanks be to God.
EWTN, live truth, live Catholic.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Tips for defending the faith this hour with Trent Horn. Our guest, Trent's podcast, Council of Trent, is on the internet, and you can find it at trenthornpodcast.com. You want to tell us anything about what's coming up on trenthornpodcast.com? Is there anything good? You doing any? Is there any game show episodes coming up?
I haven't done a game show episode yet. I'll leave that to Catholic Answers Live.
Well, as a matter of fact, this Friday we have one coming up with Karlo Broussard, second hour. But you go ahead. What's going to be on your podcast?
Catholic Answers Live focuses on game shows and cat pictures. We have an episode on the defending the nature of God that is up. On Thursday, we'll have an episode on how to confront the issue of infertility and treatments to infertility, what are morally acceptable, what are morally unacceptable. Friday, we'll have a free-for-all Friday. You'll find out what that topic will be when it comes up. But I think last week we had weird cases of mass hysteria. So those are always fun, eclectic episodes. And then the week after, I'm going to start debuting Council of Trent podcast episodes on YouTube as well. So those should be a lot of fun.
I'm just going to go right. I'm going to take the bait on where it felt like you were just a little bit dismissive of what we do here on Catholic Answers Live. But I'm just going to move right past that. Moving right on.
Oh, no, I think the game shows are well worthwhile. They definitely teach people about the faith.
Especially when Karlo's here. Nick in Montana.
Wait, I have one last suggestion for the game shows, though. Can you include slime? Like, if someone gets something right, Nickelodeon slime comes down on Karlo.
Oh, now, come on now. Karlo already has to do Pig Latin at least twice in every episode of the game show. I don't think we're... Although his kids might enjoy watching him get slime.
You could do challenge, double challenge, physical trial. Well, remember Double Dare?
No, I don't remember that.
You never saw Double Dare?
No.
You probably never saw Legends of the Hidden Temple either.
You know what would be a really fast segment we could do? It would be over very quickly. I could arm wrestle Karlo. We'll just do that. We'll throw that in every time. That'd take about a second.
I think if you looked at Karlo's biceps, you would just already automatically
My arm already hurts. My arm already hurts just looking at Karlo's arm. Yeah, I'm like, nah, that hurts, right, man? Nick in Montana's next, and he's waiting patiently. It's just Thomas, you're doing a great job on the phones today, but this is what I have. Nick in Montana, St. Michael. Is that St. Michael radio? Is that a St. Michael pair? Or is it literally St. Michael calling? Well, this should be an interesting call. Let's see if this is St. Michael. Nick, you there with St. Michael?
I am. No, well, he's always kind of watching over me.
Good for you.
No, it's just St. Michael Radio.
Okay, good. All right, good.
Here in Great Falls, Montana.
Oh, that's great. Very good. All right, go ahead with your question for Trent.
All right, so my question is, I'm presenting to a group of catechists in my parish, and we're talking about justification and justification by faith alone and justification by faith faith and good works. And kind of my premise is that yes, both and. We are justified first by our faith and followed up by a justification by our works after we have accepted the gospel of Jesus Christ through love. Right. And that charity is what really kind of pushes us over the edge. Am I on track here, or do I need to be a little bit more specific and give a little bit more detail?
You're on track with it. I think the important points to underscore is that we can say justified by faith alone if it's a particular kind of faith, like when St. Paul in Galatians chapter 5 says we practice faith working through love, a faith that's not merely intellectual assent, but one that believes and obeys. It's important. The Catechism says in paragraph 2010, I believe, that the first initiative in the order of grace, no one can merit it. So the beginning of our salvation, we could say, yes, we are saved by faith alone, grace alone, the beginning of our salvation. And the best example of that is an infant. When an infant is baptized, they have done absolutely nothing to merit the gift of justification, and justification being that which makes us righteous in the eyes of God. I also think that using particular kinds of imagery to help people understand this, that Protestants view justification more as a legal concept that is declared, guilty, not guilty, nothing changes about us. Catholics would say that justification is a familial adoption and restoration, where we become adopted sons and daughters of God, and then we partake in God's very nature, as 2 Peter 1:4 says. And so we are changed in becoming children of God and receive the light of Christ, receive that justification, received by grace alone, faith alone. But then in obedience to God, when we do good works and please him, we can increase that light that we have received, even though we can't ignite the light on our own at the beginning. And that what we do, and that really the works we do to be justified, there's only one work we must do to remain in a saved state or to be justified, and that's to avoid mortal sin. So that's a hodgepodge there. Nick, I will give you a cheat sheet, if you will, or a leg up on your presentation. Give your email to our call screener, and then I will email you a talk I just gave at the Fullness of Truth conference. And I gave this talk, and I've uploaded it to my podcast, The Council of Trent. And the talk is on the Catholic view of justification. So feel free to crib from that talk whatever you like. I will send it to you, listen to it, and then we'll also get you Jimmy Akin's book, The Drama of Salvation. But if you need something quick right now, after the show, I'll email you my talk. Take from that whatever you like. You're lucky, Ed. We just put it up last week on the podcast. And if any of you are listening, you can go to the Council of Trent podcast and just scroll back a few episodes and find it. So what do you think of that, Nick?
Oh, that's excellent. I love the imagery of we can make our light shine brighter, but we cannot start the light ourselves. That's excellent. I think I'm going to probably lead off with that. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your help.
No problem. Remember, because Jesus is the one who said, "Let your light shine before men, not to put it under a bushel basket." And we can do that by obeying God and growing in justification. That's what James is talking about when he says a man is justified by works and not by faith alone.
Nick, thank you very much for that call, and thank you for listening on St. Michael Radio 97.1 in beautiful Great Falls, Montana. Up next, we go to, well, let me see who we're going to next. Up next, we go to, I'm having trouble with my computer. Daniel in Clarksville, Tennessee, watching on YouTube. Glad to have you, Daniel. Go ahead with your question for our guest, Trent Horn.
Hi, Trent. I sent you an email earlier. You never replied to it, so I guess calling in is the best way to get a hold of you. Basically,
did you send it through my website?
Being good. I think it was through your website. Yeah.
Oh, sometimes they get lost in my spam folder. I do apologize for that. We've had problems with that, but now you're here. Go right ahead.
Yeah. No worries. Anyways, it has to do with existence being goodness itself. How does that relate to, say, the existence of a torture device?
Mm-hmm. Right. So the claim existence is goodness itself. Well, what I would say is that to exist is a good thing. Existence is a good, but it doesn't follow that everything that exists is used for good. So I guess, and I'll pause in a second to make sure we're tracking. The classical understanding of good and evil is that goodness is a thing. It is equivalent to being, and evil is an absence of being. It's an absence of goodness. It's a lack of being. So being and goodness are kind of interchangeable. So we would say evil is not a thing God made. It is an absence of good found in a thing that God made. And your concern is, well, how could that be the case if there are things like torture devices that seem to exist and are designed to cause pain and evil? Before I give an answer to that, did I summarize your position correctly?
Yes, that's pretty much the gist of it.
Okay, good. And what I would say is that a torture device, the evil that is inherent in a torture device comes from the intent of the user, not so much in the thing itself. Like when I go to the dentist and I sit down in the dentist chair, and most of us go to the dentist have had this feeling, and you sit down there and the light's shining on you, and you got the paper bib on, and you look over, and he opens the tray, and all the devices come out. My heart starts beating really fast. It looks like a torture tray. You've got the metal jagged knife things all right there. And honestly, if you were in the hands of an evil dentist, which has shown up in horror films more than once, that would be torture devices. But a good dentist would use those things to actually do good and get rid of plaque and other nasty things in your gums. So if you think about torture devices that human beings have created, they're usually combinations of things that are good in and of themselves, like metal, spikes, wood, rope, things that are good and can be used for good purposes, but are either used for evil purposes or arranged into some kind of device for an evil purpose. But the things themselves are morally neutral. They have being, they exist, they're good in that respect. So I guess that's how I would answer the question. Is that helpful?
So just to make sure I'm getting this correctly, items themselves don't necessarily have any intentionality built into them when you make them. Like, for instance, a table is used to store things on top of.
Right, yeah. Now, some things that are created may be evil, but it's because they still lack some kind of a goodness. So some kind of pornographic visual medium, pornographic piece of art or something like that, or film. I would say that is an evil thing, but the things that it is composed of, like cellular film or pencils or pixels, those things are matter. Matter is good. God made matter. That's the Manichaean heresy in the early church that said the material world was made by an evil God, and we should worship the spiritual God that made the spiritual world. The matter itself is I would say it's good that it exists, but it's morally neutral. It's not a morally good thing. It's just a good. Existence is better than non-existence. If human beings reassemble matter into devices to use for evil purposes, that reflects evil in their hearts, for example, not an evil in something that God created. So I hope that is helpful, and I'm glad you called.
Thank you, as a matter of fact, very much for the call, Daniel. Second hour, Karlo's going to be here, and we're going to do overcoming obstacles to Jesus. If you have one in your own life, or if you know someone who does and you'd like to help them, the next hour is completely for you. 888-318-7884 is our number. Trent Horn has been our guest this hour and on a bunch of hours this week. Trent, thanks for all the work you've done for us this week. It really is really nice to have you back with us.
Yes, it is nice, and looking forward to being a part of more shows, so good to be here.
A lot of great stuff happening over at the Council of Trent, Trent's podcast. You can find it by going to TrentHornPodcast.com, and if you want to get Trent's books on sale, like we said earlier, they're over at Apologist Alley over at shop.catholic.com, which I have not checked out yet. I've got to go check out Apologist Alley, but find all of Trent's books, DVDs, CDs on sale at shop.catholic.com. Hang on, we're coming right back. Karlo Broussard, Overcoming Obstacles to Jesus. Something about Jesus is drawing you, but you just can't acknowledge Jesus or Christianity is true. Maybe maybe Jesus is not attractive to you. Maybe you just, nope, I don't want anything to do with that. Maybe you've grown up or been taught in a kind of skeptical way to be skeptical of these things. But what's keeping you from believing in Jesus? What's stopping you from believing in him? That's what we do this hour on Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. Our guest, Karlo Broussard, the Cajun Uncaging the Truth, the author of a bunch of books including Meeting the Protestant Challenge, Prepare the Way, which has a whole section on overcoming obstacles to Jesus. And then Purgatory's for Real is the new one. Hi, Karlo.
Hey, Cy.
Thank you for being here.
I'm glad to be here, and I hope and pray that no slime will dump upon my head.
Can you believe he volunteered you to get slimed?
Double Dare, baby. You never watched that. That was the greatest game show.
I've never seen Double Dare. No,
yeah, it was a family game show where the mom and the dad and the brother and the sisters were all participating, and they would go through these challenges, and it involved lots and lots of slime.
Oh,
so that's what he was referring to.
See, I think I'm too old for it.
But I don't want slime.
No, you don't. No, you are not.
Of course, it wouldn't be too bad because of my bald head.
But you at least wouldn't get it stuck in your hair.
That's right.
Yeah, right.
Just wash my clothes and it'd be okay.
No, but you're a person of taste and refinement, and we shouldn't slime you.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean,
speaking of taste and refinement, I'm also glad you took the cat picture off the desk there.
We're not talking about the cat picture. Well,
I'm allergic to cats, and
it's just
don't
a
care
picture,
for cats. Although cats exist, and they are good insofar as they exist.
That's right.
So I have to acknowledge that metaphysical fact.
Yes, you do, and you're the only person who thinks of cats in that way. No one else is like, what about the metaphysics of cats? But that's Karlo. 888-318-7884 is the number. And if you have an obstacle yourself, or someone else you'd like to help them overcome an obstacle to belief in Jesus, or maybe you're a school teacher at a Catholic school and you regularly come up with a question about people who can't come to belief in Jesus. You want some help? Karlo's here to help. 888-318-7884. There's a lot of there's just like you could make a whole list of obstacles from the how could I trust the Gospels? They come from a world that's long gone,
right,
to just personal obstacles that might be emotional obstacles
to
overcome. So let's just start with the historical one first of all. I mean, how could I believe those Gospels? They're thousands of years old. I don't know who wrote them. How could I believe all that?
Right. Well, one line of response is to say, well, if historians are going to trust the biographies of, say, Alexander the Great, which are 400 plus years removed from the events they're recording, or the biographies of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, which are also 400 plus years removed from the events they're recording, then we ought to trust and have an approach of trustworthiness, of trust to the Gospels. These early Christian documents that are ancient biographies of the life and teachings of Jesus, which are only written within and right at 30 to 40 years removed from the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus and what he said. And of course, John's gospel dates a little bit later in the first century, so that's right at 60 years removed. But when you contrast these other biographies of ancient figures with these biographies of the Christian figure Jesus, then on those grounds alone, we ought to be able to approach the Gospels with what scholars call a hermeneutic of trust, rather than a hermeneutic of suspicion. That's just basically, I'm going to approach the Gospels with trust rather than starting with suspicion.
Mm-hmm.
And given that general trustworthiness of the Gospels, we can trust what they're telling us Jesus said and did. So that's the temporal proximity that the records have to the events that they're recording. And then, as scholars point out, we don't only have, scholars have done a lot of historiographical research and come to the conclusion that it's not just the day or the date when these Christians are penning the Gospels, but they're drawing on sources and traditions that predate the penning of the Gospels, which puts the information and the content that they're actually putting down in writing, putting it even closer to the events that they're recording. And the importance of that side is that given the close temporal proximity that the records have to the events they're recording, it excludes the possibility of legendary developments.
Yes.
Because when they're putting this stuff down in writing, there are people still alive at the time who were walking around with Jesus and knew Jesus. So if there were any legendary developments that would have been creeping into these gospel narratives of the life of Jesus, there would have been people to call them on it and say, no, that's not factual. That's not the case. But we don't have that. So the close temporal proximity is very important that the Gospels have to the events of Jesus' life, because it precludes or excludes the possibility of legendary development. Unlike when you have the apocryphal Gospels or the Gnostic Gospels that begin arising in the mid-2nd century, about AD 150 and after that, like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Peter, and these Gnostic
are a different
Gospels.
thing,
Notice how when they arise is like 2 generations, 80 to 90 years removed from the events that the gospel, Christian gospels are recording, which allows for legendary developments, because the people alive whenever these Gnostic gospels are coming about were not alive at the time of Jesus.
Yeah.
So you lack that oversight and verification by those who were there at the events that these Gospels are recording. So that's one way among many, as I point out in actually my book, Prepare the Way. I have a chapter on this, and giving reasons why we can have a general trust of these Gospels, which are our primary historical sources for the life, death, resurrection, and teachings of Jesus. And since we can trust them, we can trust what they tell us about Jesus, then we begin looking into what Jesus said about himself. He's God, that he rose from the dead to vindicate that claim of divinity. And so that's one way. And then when we establish the historicity of the Gospels, that actually knocks 2 birds down with one stone, because it can be directed toward those who don't think Jesus was a historical person to begin with. And so we can knock that bird down, and I'm using that metaphorically, not literally, for our listeners out there. Okay,
no birds were harmed in the making of this program.
That's right. So we can take care of that issue, but then also to establishing the historical reasonableness of the historical grounds for looking into what Jesus said and did.
Karlo Broussard is our guest. The book he mentioned is called Prepare the Way, Overcoming Obstacles to God, the Gospel, and the Church. And right in there is that material on obstacles to Jesus. A bunch of folks on the line, but you know what? I think we better go to a break first. So we'll do the break, and then we will come right back with your questions for helping overcome your obstacles or another person's obstacles to Jesus. Your questions for Karlo Broussard.
Stay with us for more Catholic Answers Live.
Hi, this is Cy Kellett. Catholic Answers Focus is the podcast for living, understanding, and defending your Catholic faith, and you're not going to want to miss it this week. We've got our friend Monica Dumit from Australia to talk about what's happening with confession and how governments are infringing on the right to confession around the world. And we've also got Chris Check, the first part of a 3-part series on the Inquisition. CatholicAnswersFocus.com is where you can find us, or find us wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or just watch us on YouTube, CatholicAnswersFocus.com.
The Aquinas Writing Advantage program is part of Homeschool Connections' set of online courses for your Catholic homeschool. Homeschool Connections' website is homeschoolconnections.com.
This is what St. Teresa of Calcutta, also known as Mother Teresa, once said about prayer. Love to pray. Feel often during the day the need for prayer, and take trouble to pray. Prayer enlarges the heart until it is capable of containing God's gift of Himself. Ask and seek, and your heart will grow big enough to receive Him and keep Him as your own. That is why we need prayer.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. I'm Cy Kellett, your host, Karlo Broussard, our guest. Here at Catholic Answers, our mission is to bring people closer to Jesus Christ through his church that he founded 2,000 years ago, the church that's still with us today, the one called the Catholic Church. And if that mission has impacted your life, it would mean a lot to us if you'd tell us that story. As a matter of fact, we've set up an email, an email address, right? Where you can share your story, mystory@catholic.com. That's where you send it, mystory@catholic.com. If you'd like to share your story of how Catholic Answers, maybe it's the School of Apologetics, maybe it's one of Karlo's books, maybe it's one of the videos we make, or maybe it's this program, if it's had an impact in bringing you closer to Jesus and his church, we'd love to hear about it. mystory@catholic.com. If you're having obstacles, however, to coming close to Jesus, this hour is for you. Karlo Broussard is here to address obstacles to coming to full faith belief in Jesus. 888-318-7884 is the number. We start out in Las Vegas, watching on YouTube. Mateo, thanks for your call. What's your obstacle and how can Karlo help?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I wanted to say first, appreciate everything that Catholic Answers has done. I'm a 19-year-old Christian from an evangelical background, but I got baptized as a Catholic exactly 1 month ago.
Oh, wow.
Hey,
Mateo.
welcome,
God
Mateo.
bless you, brother. Welcome home, man.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So here's my question. In about 1 month from now, so I'm in the middle, I'm leaving for Army basic training, so it's going to be pretty intense, and I plan on going to Mass and reading my Bible best I can.
Yeah.
One thing I've struggled with recently is learning about Judas and the character of Judas as it relates to the other apostles. So I guess my question is, how are disciples and new disciples like me supposed to respond to the treachery of Judas, especially when Judas himself was a student and picked by Jesus?
Yes. All right, Mateo, this is a great question. This gets to the fundamental mystery of God's permission of not only sin, but mortal sin, right? And so I think the first thought that comes to mind is it does manifest to us, Mateo, the possibility for those who are called by Christ and who enter into a relationship with Christ after accepting him into their lives and entering into that relationship can fall from that saving relationship. So I think Judas serves as a good example for what we believe as Catholics, that once we're initially justified, it is possible to lose that justification. In other words, it is possible to lose that rightly ordered relationship with God, where we order our lives to God as our supernatural goal, as our ultimate end, which is union with him in heaven. So Judas is a good example for this, where it's possible for us to lose our salvation. Now, this raises other questions about whether God is just or not in permitting Judas, as well as myself or anybody, to fall into mortal sin, or any sin for that matter. And the answer to that question is no, God is not unjust for permitting us to fall into sin. And the reason, Mateo, that God is not unjust or that it's not contrary to his goodness is because God is not bound in justice to himself to give us what is not owed to us insofar as we are human beings. The graces that we need to be upheld in the good and doing good and pursuing good, and even the grace of repentance, these are things that are over and above our human nature. We do not have a right to these graces. So if God, in his infinite wisdom and in his plan, wills to not give such graces to uphold us in the good, which means he's permitting or allowing us to exercise our free will contrary to his rule and his law, exercising our free will to reject whatever sufficient graces that he's given to us, God, that's not unjust on God's part, because he's not bound to give us those graces. Nor is he bound to give us the grace of repentance once we do fall into mortal sin. Sometimes, in God's infinite wisdom, he does give those graces to some to repent, and that's pure gift. That is entirely gratuitous on God's part, and that manifests his mercy. As to why God gives these graces to some and not others, like, for example, Mateo, why did God give the grace God permitted both Peter and Judas to fall into mortal sin. He did not give them the grace to uphold them in the good. He permitted them to fall. And God only gave the grace to Peter of repentance, but he didn't give the grace of repentance to Judas. As to why God gave that grace to Peter and not Judas, we bow in humility to that, Mateo, and say we do not know. Because in order to answer that question, we'd have to know the mind of God, the divine essence. And the only way we could possibly know that reason is if God tells us or if we were God. And neither of those conditions can be met, all right? So it's not unjust for God to do that. The last thought that comes to mind, Mateo, as St. Thomas Aquinas would argue, we can say that in as much as God permits one to fall into mortal sin and imposes punishment upon such an individual with either temporal punishment or even the eternal punishment of hell, if God permits that individual to die in that state and not giving them the grace of repentance, then that eternal punishment will be a manifestation of God's justice. So at no point in the analysis do we find any aspect that is contrary to God's goodness or justice. Do we find mystery? Yes, but there is nothing in that analysis that goes against God's justice or God's goodness. What do you think of that, brother?
No, I can appreciate that. So the function of reconciliation, of repentance, these are functions of God's divine mercy, not God's divine justice, right? So it's not so much, I'm asking, I guess, the second question here. It's not so much that Judas was inevitably going to fall because, of course, he had to make the free choice, right? Where he's not like a robot in Scripture. So he had to make the free choice to betray Jesus. But as a function of like an example, like, hey, if we don't have God's mercy, this is the result, right? Whereas Peter is the example of, with God's mercy, you can be brought back into the fold.
That is correct. So Judas, and this is an essential element of the equation here, right? Essential part of the equation, that Judas did freely reject whatever sufficient graces that God was giving him to repent. So we acknowledge as Catholics that God gives sufficient graces, that is to say, graces that have a real potential for someone to repent or to be saved, right? And so God is giving these graces, but Judas freely uses his will to reject those graces. Now, why did God permit Judas to reject that grace? We have to bow in humility there and say we don't know. If God would have given Judas the grace to cooperate with the prior sufficient graces, Judas would have repented. But in God's infinite wisdom, he did not in this order of providence. As to why God didn't, we bow in humility and we say we don't know. Does that contradict God's justice? No, it doesn't. But we can say, Mateo, that if God would have given that grace of repentance to Judas, like he did to Peter, that grace would have actualized Judas's free will. It would have been working in and through and with Judas's free will to cooperate and repent. Remember, Mateo, in Philippians 2:13, in Philippians 12, St. Paul says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. But after that, in verse 13, he says, God works in and through us. And that's how we are to understand grace. If that grace is not there, then the repentance, then the free will freely rejects that opportunity to repent. But if God does give the grace, then Judas would have repented. So hopefully that's helpful for you.
Mateo, where do you go off to do your basic training?
I'm going to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, for about 2 months or so, and then I'll be heading to Fort Gordon, Georgia. That's for 5 months. So.
Well, God bless you.
Amen.
I'd like to send you a copy of Karlo. You're new to the faith, and I'd love to send you a copy of Karlo's book, Prepare the Way, Overcoming Obstacles to God, the Gospel, and the Church, because a whole bunch of this is discussed in there. If you'd like it, just hang on the line, and Thomas will get your information. Thomas is doing the phones for us today, and we'll send it off to you so you can, if you got a month, you probably got time to read it before you head off. But I know you got a lot of physical fitness work and all that to do as well. God bless you, brother. I hope we'll hear from you again. We got to go now to Roman in San Antonio. Oh, in Texas, listening on Guadalupe Radio. Roman, glad to have you. Go ahead with your question for Karlo.
Hi, Mr. Broussard. I had a question about the crucifixion, and I might be misinterpreting or misunderstanding scriptures, but we know that crucifixions in Rome happened, or under Romans happened through the wrist. But in scripture, you hear about Jesus' ascension, and he extended his pierced hands as a final blessing. And then even in like private revelations, or like with people who have the stigmata, they're like on the hands. But we know Jesus should have been crucified through the wrists. Even in like the Shroud of Turin, it's a man crucified through the wrists, and so it's kind of something I'm struggling with. And I'm a cradle Catholic. I'm 20. I'm getting all my questions out, and it's a lot. It's a lot of questioning.
Sure. Yeah. No, Roman, it's a great question, and to be honest with you, brother, I haven't done a lot of research on this particular topic. I do know that scholars do say that there is a bit of uncertainty here as to exactly where the nails would have pierced Jesus's either hands or wrists in a way that would be consistent with what we know from ancient research of ancient crucifixions. What is interesting, I do know this, Roman, is that in the Bible, John, in John 20:25 through 27, where he's talking about how Jesus had wounds in his hands, the Greek word that's translated hands there is cher, and I might be butchering the pronunciation of that Greek word, is Cheir. And that word literally means hands, but there is a place in the Bible, for example, in Acts 12, verse 7, where it seems to be used in reference to Peter's wrists. So whenever the angel appears to Peter when he's in prison and says, "Get up quickly," and the chains fell off his hands. The same Greek word is used there, but we could reasonably infer from that the chains would have been around his wrist. And so you have this Greek word, literally meaning hands, seemingly being used for wrists as well. And one possible reason for that, Roman, is that there is no Greek word, as I understand it, for wrists. So it's possible that whenever the scripture speaks of the wounds in Jesus' hands, it could very well be referring to his wrists. But that's only a plausible explanation. We're still left in sort of the darkness of uncertainty here, because this Greek word could refer to hands like we see in the imagery, or it could refer to his wrists. So we simply have to, sort of bow in humility and say, well, this is one of those questions that we don't have certainty about. But we have at least a plausible explanation to try and reconcile the biblical use of the word hands and reconciling it with what we know about ancient crucifixion and nails going through wrists, etc. So that's what I would say to that.
Okay, Roman?
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much. I was going to do something with his name, Roman, and the Romans, and I just got myself all crossed up, and I got nothing.
That's why he's so fixated, pun intended, on nails.
Yeah, right, exactly. Karlo Broussard is our guest. He's the author of 3 books here at Catholic Answers: Meeting the Protestant Challenge, How to Answer 50 Biblical Objections to Catholic Belief, and Prepare the Way, Overcoming Obstacles to God, the Gospel, and the Church. And that's what our topic is this hour: overcoming obstacles to belief in Jesus. If you need some help with obstacles you personally have to belief in Jesus, or someone that you'd like to help, 888-318-7884. To finish out the trilogy, his latest book is Purgatory is for Real: Good News About the Afterlife for Those Who Aren't Perfect Yet. Let's go to Virginia Beach now. Watching on YouTube in Virginia Beach is Ben. Ben, go ahead with your question for Karlo.
Hey there, sir. Thank you for having me. I grew up in an evangelical background, and I have been converting to Catholicism over the past year or so. I'm looking forward to Easter.
Awesome.
And ever since I was little, I was curious about a very specific part of Jesus as a person. Okay. We know that he was the one who brought us into the new covenant, right? We were in the old covenant, but his death and resurrection brought us into the new covenant by fulfilling the old. And my question has to do with how he did that, because we know that while Judaism was still being practiced in its fullness, circumcision was the sign and seal of salvation that was given to infants and, of course, adults when they converted to Judaism. But somehow, when Jesus died and rose again, this sign and seal was no longer considered circumcision and was considered baptism.
Yeah.
And my question is, why is that? And more technically, how?
Yeah, okay, so that's fair enough. Unfortunately, I'm not going to let you answer it right now, Karlo, because the music is about to start playing. Ben, can you hang on just a minute or two, and we'll get right back to you?
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to.
Okay, thank you so much. Karlo Broussard, our guest. We do have to take a quick break. This is one we don't have a choice about, so we got to go do it right now. The question having to do with how does Jesus move us from the time of the old covenant into the time of the new covenant? We will get back to Ben and his question and Karlo's answer right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live. We're here for you.
To many people, even many Christians, purgatory is a fantasy, or worse, a wicked lie invented by the church to make salvation complicated and keep people in fear. But I'm here to tell you that purgatory is fact, not fiction. The Bible supports it, Christians have historically believed in it, and it makes theological sense. In my new book, Purgatory is for Real, I provide the evidence and reasoning to help you understand this controversial doctrine and demonstrate how it's actually a joyful, hopeful reality, not something shadowy and mysterious, but a sign of God's love and mercy. To get your copy of Purgatory is for Real, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Did you know you can access Catholic Answers Live right from your phone or other mobile device? Download the Catholic Answers Live app today. The Catholic Answers Live app, available now on iOS and Android.
If you spend any time on Twitter, Facebook, or mainstream media, you're probably familiar with the litany of slogans that skeptics employ to rescue you from the foolish belief that God exists. The constant onslaught seems to leave people with the idea that they have no alternative but to embrace atheism. How can a Christian respond? In One Less God Than You, John DeRosa breaks down 20 of the most common atheist challenges and shows you how to craft effective answers. Atheism is more aggressive and widespread than ever. Read One Less God Than You and prepare yourself to respond with the joyful truth that God is real. To get your copy of One Less God Than You, visit shop.catholic.com today or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you. Overcoming obstacles to belief in Jesus this hour on Catholic Answers Live. If there's some obstacle in your life to being fully connected to Jesus, to fully investing yourself in belief in Jesus, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. Or if you're a person who'd like to help someone else who has an obstacle in the way of fully believing in Jesus, 888-318-7884. Karlo Broussard is our guest. He's an apologist here at Catholic Answers and a great speaker. And on the line, we have Ben in Virginia Beach. And we got a question, but we didn't get an answer because we had to take a break. So essentially, the question from Ben, and I'll let you tell me if I get the gist of this right, Ben. But Karlo, essentially the question from Ben. So we believe that Jesus initiated the new covenant, moved us from the old covenant to the new. But how? How did Jesus do that? Is that a fair kind of summing up of your question, Ben?
I would say almost. You see, Karlo, I grew up in a Southern Baptist background, and we understood baptism to just be an outward expression of your faith. And
right.
When I converted to Catholicism, I hear that actually baptism is so much more than that.
Right.
That it's just like circumcision was. It was the sign and seal of the individual's salvation. So I'm curious, why did it change from circumcision to baptism? And more importantly, how did Jesus bring that about?
Okay, so to the why question, Ben, I think we're in mystery here, and we would have to know the mind of God as to why God decided to institute baptism rather than some other observance or ceremony to be the gateway through which we enter into covenantal familial relationship with God in the new covenant, as opposed to what was done in the Old Testament concerning circumcision. Now, we know we can offer reasons as why God instituted circumcision for the Old Covenant, but why the change? I mean, the change is going to signal something new, that God is doing something new in salvation history, which he is doing through his son, Jesus Christ. But why baptism rather than something else? I think we're going to have to bow in humility there and say we don't know. And only the answer to that question is going to lie in God's essence, which we don't have access to. Now, how God does it, how he initiates that new covenant, well, we can start with Jesus' teaching where he begins to teach us that certain things of the old law are going to be passing away with his advent, with the advent of the new covenant. So, for example, I'm thinking of Matthew 15, 18 through 19, where Jesus says, but what comes out of the mouth proceeds, where he says in verse 18, it's not what goes in the mouth that defiles a man, but what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and this defiles a man. For out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murder, adultery, etc. So that's a hint that he is no longer going to bind the people of God on earth to hold fast to those ceremonial precepts that governed God's people and the Israelites partaking of food and drink. That's no longer going to be binding on us. We get a hint with that in Jesus' teaching here. But I think, Ben, the key is reading the author of Hebrews and what the author of Hebrews teaches us about the sacrifice of Jesus in comparison to the sacrifices of the Old Covenant. In verse 9 of Hebrews chapter 10, Ben, the author says, according to this arrangement, gifts and sacrifices are offered which cannot perfect the conscience of the worshiper, referring to the Old Testament sacrifices. But then in verses 13 through 14, he goes on to say, for if the sprinkling of defiled persons with the blood of goats and bulls and with the ashes of a heifer sacrifice for the purification of the flesh, talking about ritual purification for the Israelites in the Old Covenant, how much more, the author goes on to say, shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, purify your conscience from dead works to serve the living God. And so there, Ben, we have the key to interpret how Jesus initiates the dispensation of righteousness, as St. Paul calls it in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, right around verses 8 through 9. It's through the death of Jesus Christ by which our interior souls, right, our consciences can be purified. The death of Jesus on the cross, that sacrifice causes our purification. And that's the good news of the gospel message. Whereas the sacrifices of the old could not, the sacrifice of Jesus does indeed purify us. Now the question becomes, how did Christ will for that purifying effect to take place within our souls? And this is where baptism comes in, Ben. Unlike circumcision in the Old Covenant, which was merely a sign of one's covenantal relationship with God, baptism is going to be similar to circumcision, but it's not going to be exactly the same, Ben, and this is the key. Because what we see in the New Testament is, according to Jesus, baptism, being born again of water and spirit, is going to give us the new birth, constituting us as sons and daughters of the Father. But even more so, I think in Romans 6, we get a clearer picture, Ben, verses 3 through 4, where Paul teaches us that in baptism, we die with Christ. And there, Ben, you have the means by which the death of Jesus is going to effect us, going to cause our purification, which is what the author of Hebrews taught us. It's going to be through baptism, because in that baptism, Ben, we mystically die with Christ. But as Paul says, we also rise with him. And check this out, brother. In verse 7 of Romans chapter 6, Paul says that through that death, in that baptismal death, we are freed from sin. And the Greek word there used for freed is the Greek word that's used for to be justified or to justified in verb form. And so literally Paul is saying that in this baptismal death with Christ, we are justified from sin, linking justification and sanctification. That is to say, according to the Catholic view, that justification involves the interior transformation of the soul. So what Jesus did on the cross, initiating the new covenant, which is a covenant of heart righteousness, you might say, or as one Bible scholar put it, John Kincaid, cardiac righteousness, that takes effect in the soul in and through the means of baptism. And finally, I'll leave you with St. Paul in Colossians chapter 2, verses 11 through 12, where Paul himself makes the connection between baptism and circumcision when he says, in him, Jesus, also you were circumcised with a circumcision made without hands by putting off the body of the flesh and the circumcision of Christ, and you were buried with him in baptism. Paul links the burial in baptism with the and calls that the circumcision of Christ. In other words, what circumcision did in the Old Testament, initiating one into the covenantal familial relationship with God, baptism does in the New. But Ben, here we got to get this point, brother. What's different about baptism in relation to the circumcision of the Old Covenant is that not only does it make us a son or daughter of God, but it actually transforms us interiorly, whereby our consciences are purified by the death of Jesus Christ on the cross.
Ben, lots of folks on the line, so I'm going to keep going. I hope that was helpful, and I hope we'll get to hear from you again. Welcome home to the Catholic Church. Let me go now to Janice in Grimes, Iowa, listening on EWTN. Janice, you there with us?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Janice. Go ahead with your question for Karlo.
My son has asked me a couple times, and I don't have a good answer for him, how God can let horrible things happen to innocent people. Mm-hmm. He gives me an example about there are children in third world countries who can get some sort of bug or something that bores into their eyes or their brains.
Right.
And asked me, and I don't have a good answer for that.
How old is your son, Janice?
He's 27, and he picks a lot of stuff up off of the internet.
Sure. Yeah, so how could God allow this? That's not an uncommon question.
Yeah, so Janice, when I'm faced with that question, I'm always asking myself, okay, what is the driving force behind this question? If the question is, why does God allow this person or that person or these people or those people to undergo suffering in their lives, we have to bow in humility and say we don't know, because we don't know why God chooses to prevent suffering for some and not others. Okay, so if that's the question, then we can bow in humility. But often when this sort of question is asked, Janice, what's going on or what's driving it is the assumption that for God to permit suffering in somebody's life is unjust and contrary to his goodness. And if that is the claim, then that's a claim we're going to want to challenge and say, well, hey, wait a minute, that's not true, because for God to prevent us from suffering, I mean, we're material beings. We live in a material world. Material things interact with one another, where the goodness of one thing is going to curtail the goodness of another, okay? That's part and parcel of the natural material world that we live in. That's what we have, okay? Now, we experience some things ourselves and other things undergoing suffering in their lives. So the question becomes, is it unjust for God to permit such suffering within this corporeal world? And the answer to that question, Janice, is no, it is not unjust. Why? Because for God to prevent us from suffering, whether it be stubbing my toe on the door frame or such an atrocity as what you're articulating, what your son is articulating, it is not unjust for God to permit such things to happen, because for him to do so would be a grace, and that's something over and above our natures as human beings, as corporeal beings. That would be a miracle. The bottom line is that. It would be a miracle. And here's the key, Janice. God is not bound in justice to himself to perform miracles for his creatures. And so for God to permit such suffering, it's not contrary to his justice or goodness. And as a Christian, Janice, that's the only job basically we have to show that such permission is not evidence, such suffering or the existence of such suffering, no matter how bad, is not evidence against God, because God is not unjust for permitting it. As to why God allows that particular suffering, we don't know. And that's not a cop-out, Janice. That's a reasonable conclusion, because if God exists, he's infinite. And we're finite. He's the creator, we're the creature, he's God, we're not. And so we should expect that there are some things that we're not going to be able to know that resides in the mind of God, unless he tells us. But he hasn't told us why he allows suffering for this person or that person. So it's a reasonable conclusion to bow in humility and say, I don't know in this particular circumstance. But what I do know is that for God to permit such suffering is not contrary to his justice or goodness. And that is key, Janice, because I can still affirm that God exists, that he's all good, and that he's perfectly just, and at the same time affirm that there is suffering in the world that he could prevent, but he permits. As to why the permission in this particular circumstance, I don't know. But that in no way poses a threat to my belief that he exists and that he's just and that he's good, because such permission of suffering is not in conflict with his justice. Now, that's the philosophical answer, Janice. Of course, we can look to Christian revelation, and we see through the revelation of Jesus Christ and the teaching of the apostles that there is a redemption to come of the entire cosmos, not just for us as human beings, but the entire cosmos will be redeemed at a time when there will be no suffering whatsoever. And how the sufferings of this life, Paul says, will pale in comparison to the glory that will be revealed in those who love the Lord, and even the glory of the Lord revealed through the entire cosmos. And so, although the permission of the suffering of our lives is tragic and very tragic at times, it is not ultimately tragic given the revelation of Jesus Christ. And whenever we bring all of that together, it doesn't dispel the darkness of the mystery of suffering and evil entirely, but it does shine enough light in that darkness, Janice, such that we don't have to allow ourselves to be entrapped in the death grip of despair and depression, or even atheism in rejecting God. Because such darkness and the mystery of darkness and suffering and evil is not a good reason to reject God's existence.
Janice, I hope that is helpful to you. Karlo, are there any books that you like are like at a common level?
Thank you.
Maybe we could just suggest one.
Yeah, so you could look up Peter Kreeft's book, Making Sense Out of Suffering.
That's what I was thinking.
That's a great resource.
Okay.
You can also get a hold of my book, Prepare the Way. In my book, I have a couple of chapters, 3 or 4 chapters that deal with the problem of evil.
Well, let's send it. We'll send it to
Yeah,
Janice.
so that would be great. And then also our good friend and colleague here at Catholic Answers, Trent Horn, in his book, Answering Atheism, he has some chapters in there that deals with the problem of evil as well.
Janice, if you want to hang on, we'll get your address. Thomas will get your address, and we'll send you Prepare the Way. And then the other book was Peter Kreeft's. Say the title again of Peter Kreeft's book.
Making Sense Out of Suffering.
Making Sense Out of Suffering. Janice, thanks. We have to go to a quick break, as I said. But I got to read this first. I don't know why this amuses me so much to read this ad copy today. Have you visited Apologist Alley? Apologist Alley can be found at shop.catholic.com. It has all the resources by your favorite apologists, separated by apologist. Want to load up on Trent Horn resources? Visit the Trent Horn section. Love Karlo Broussard? The answer is yes. We do love Karlo Broussard. Check out the Karlo Corner in the Apologist Alley. And today, until midnight, you'll find all of Trent and Karlo's books, CDs, and DVDs on sale at very special prices. That's Apologist Alley at shop.catholic.com.
You're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
A lot of people think that street evangelization involves yelling out of a bullhorn telling people that they're going to hell. Not so with St. Paul's Street Evangelization. Our methods are non-confrontational and effective. We simply offer information on the Catholic faith along with rosaries, miraculous medals, and prayer. Pope Francis wrote about how beautiful it is to see street preachers joyfully bringing Jesus to every corner of the earth. Street evangelization is fun and fruitful. Join us today at streetevangelization.com.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
I went to Las Vegas years and years ago for one of these cable shows. And I was shocked to see all these old ladies in their 70s and 80s getting off that plane, running for a slot machine. You don't have a chance to win. They're all fixed. I know, my uncle used to have slot machines.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Karlo Broussard, our guest. We mentioned that book that we're going to send to Janice, Prepare the Way, Overcoming Obstacles to God, the Gospel, and the Church. This hour is about overcoming obstacles to belief in Jesus. If you're facing one of those obstacles or someone you know is, you're welcome to call 888-318-7884. Karlo's latest book, however, is Purgatory is for Real. That's a good one, too. It's good news about the afterlife for those who aren't perfect yet. Purgatory is for real. Now we go down to Chile. Lucas in Chile watching on YouTube. You are next. You there with us, Lucas?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, very good. Go ahead with your question for Karlo.
Perfect. Thanks for taking my call. My question is basically regarding the resurrection accounts.
Yeah.
And it's something I heard, I think, Jordan Peterson bring up, that the resurrection accounts are very short and very seldom in comparison to the rest of the gospel. So why would that be? If someone was really risen from the dead, shouldn't you focus on that rather than his life?
Right. That's a great question, Lucas. The answer to the question is why these authors devote the amount of text to the resurrection accounts that they do rather than more. I don't know the answer to that question. I would have to ask Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
I just wanted to show that I knew one.
I would have to ask them that question, and they would have to tell me, and that's not possible. And they haven't told us in their written text as to why they devoted only a certain amount to the resurrection rather than more. So I think we're going to have to bow in humility there, Lucas, and say, we don't know, and I don't know if we can even possibly come to an answer to that. But I can say this, Lucas. We can start from the fact that the resurrection accounts are restrained in a sense. Like they are, you would think, as you have indicated, Lucas, that they would elaborate more on it. But they do seem restrained in their account of the resurrection. They do focus on it. They state it. It's a fact. This is what happened. And what's interesting about that, Lucas, is that actually gives us good reason to think that these authors are not fudging the facts. It gives us good reason to think that these resurrection accounts are not legendary developments. Why? Because when we contrast the gospel accounts of the resurrection, like just say Mark's accounts, very simple, and we contrast that with the resurrection accounts of the Gnostic Gospels that begin arising in the mid to late 2nd century, we find an extreme contrast between the two. So, for example, Lucas, consider the apocryphal Gospel of Peter. And there you have giant angels, a talking cross. This is within the context of describing the resurrection of Jesus. You have these giant angels, a talking cross, a voice from heaven, and Jesus coming out of the tomb as a gigantic figure whose head reaches into the clouds. Now compare that account with the restrained, simplified accounts of the Gospels, in particular Mark. And that editorial restraint, Lucas, is actually grounds for us to conclude that they're not fudging things. They're not creating some legendary narrative or story. They're just simply stating it as a fact. This is what happened without any sort of grandiose elaboration. And rather than that counting against the historicity of these resurrection accounts, Lucas, it actually points in favor of it.
Okay, Lucas?
Great. That's awesome.
Thank you. You're our first South American call in a long time, so I really appreciate that you took the time to call. Thanks.
No, thanks to you guys. Keep doing the good work.
Thank you, brother.
Wow, we got along really good with Lucas. I think that went really well. I like it when we get along with callers like that.
Amen.
Let's go to Robert in Missouri. And where is Robert listening? Thomas just typed in phone. I don't know. What does that mean? Robert, are you there with us?
Yes, sir.
All right, go ahead with your...
I'm sorry. The question I have is regarding Matthew and Peter's confession about Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is relevant to the church itself. But Jesus Christ says to his disciples, "Who do you say I am?" And St. Peter spoke out and said, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God."
Yes.
Now, in comparison to this, that was a prediction of a short fashion. Then we go in the same chapter of Matthew, and it talks about St. Peter saying to Jesus at his first prediction of his passion, he says, "God forbid, Lord, no such thing shall ever happen to you."
Right.
And Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are an obstacle to me.
Yeah.
You are thinking not as God does,
but as men do. Robert, I'm only interrupting you just because Carlo's only going to have about a few seconds to answer if we don't get it to a question. So it seems like here's on the one hand Peter confessing Jesus as Messiah and Lord, and then just moments later saying, "There's no way you can go to the cross." So your question is about what? About how these are related to one another?
Yes, I mean, one comes right before the other.
Yeah.
Affirmation of Christ's Messiah, and then as Satan did in the wilderness, tried to get Jesus to doubt his messiahship.
Okay.
So,
right.
In other words,
okay.
Yeah, Robert, we got to answer it. But
all right, so here we go real quick because I know we're coming up to the end of the show. I think, Robert, what's going on here is the revelation that Peter, apart from Jesus and the power of Jesus, left to himself, he will fall. He will falter. And we actually have a hint of this in 4 chapters earlier, in Matthew chapter 14, where Peter starts walking on water by the power of Jesus. And then in God's infinite wisdom, he permits Peter to begin sinking, right? He no longer upholds him on the water and permits Peter to begin sinking. Why? Because he began to doubt. He began to lose faith. Apart from Jesus, Peter will sink. But what does Jesus reveal? He picks him back up. Here we have Jesus telling Peter, "You are the rock, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of the netherworld shall not prevail against it." That's only on condition that Jesus wills to uphold Peter as the rock, to solidify him as the foundation of the church. Apart from Jesus, Peter will fall. Apart from Jesus, man will fall when left to his own devices. But the beautiful message, Robert, is that Jesus will not let Peter fall when it comes to being the foundation of the church. That's the message, because Jesus made the promise, "I will build, and the gates of the netherworld will not prevail against it." The only way that is possible is if Jesus is preserving Peter as the foundation. Jesus is trying to teach us that without him, Peter by himself, everything's going to crumble. He's going to fall. But Jesus is saying that's not what's going to happen. because he's going to preserve Peter as the foundation of the church.
Robert, thank you. I hope you don't feel that we hurried you, but as you can hear from the music, we only had a little time to get to that. So I hope that was helpful. Tomorrow's open forum. We got 2 hours of open forum. You can call. You can ask any question you want about the life, the faith, the history, the beliefs of the Catholic Church and Catholic people. Our guest this hour has been Karlo Broussard. You can find his books at, what's it called? Apologist Alley over at shop.catholic.com on sale right now. Karlo, thank you.
Thank you, Si. Yeah. It was a joy.
You heading out to speak anywhere? Should we?
Yeah, I'm heading to St. Cecilia in Cincinnati, near Cincinnati, in March 7th, 8th, and 9th. St. Cecilia
so that's not
Catholic
that far
Church.
away. All right, so
Yep.
if you're in the Cincinnati area, look up Karlo coming to St. Cecilia Church. We'll see you tomorrow, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.